Today we're looking at the Direwolf 2 by Flydigi. Inside the box you'll find a cardboard container with various items, like an English and Chinese manual, as well as a brochure for other Flydigi products, a USB-A to USB-C cable, a wireless dongle made specifically for this controller, and of course the Direwolf 2 itself. If it wasn't obvious already, the Direwolf 2 has a similar shell to the series controller, and among those similarities are some premium differences. It has membrane A, B, X, Y, start, and select buttons, Hall effect right and left analog thumbsticks, a very satisfying clicky D-pad, a home button. However, the Direwolf 2's function button is not a share button. Similar analog Hall effect triggers, as well as similar shoulder buttons, a USB-C port for wired, and a switch for wireless connections, and that wraps up the similarities. Now, onto the extras. In addition to the Hall effect thumbsticks, the Direwolf 2 has blue anti-friction rings for each thumbstick. And if you notice, Flydigi uses a patented D-pad design that raises it slightly above the shell of the controller. There are also extra M1 and M2 buttons located perfectly for the middle fingers on the grips. There's a built-in rechargeable 800 mAh battery that is advertised to last up to 40 hours, and there's 3 connection modes, starting with dongle mode that will give you a polling rate of 500 Hz when wired and 300 Hz when wireless. Bluetooth mode, which is intended for Android and iOS devices that can't use the dongle. This mode gets a polling rate of 125 Hz. And finally, NS mode, which is meant for connecting to a Nintendo Switch. A missing feature compared to the Xbox Series controller are a lack of impulse triggers, meaning there are no vibration motors dedicated to each trigger. That said, there are still vibration motors in the grips. And finally, there is also a gyro that can be mapped to either thumbstick and customized via Flydigi's Space Station PC application. But before you do anything, make sure to update this application as well as update the controller and dongle to the latest firmware. It's worth mentioning that Flydigi's manual mentions that a mobile application called Flydigi Game Hall can be used on mobile devices to upgrade the controller's firmware, but the only application I could find was called Flydigi Game Center, and that did not recognize the Direwolf 2, at least at the time of this recording. Now, with the overview out of the way, I wanted to take a few minutes to go over the things I like and don't like about this controller, because at $49 Flydigi's Direwolf 2 could be a tough sale depending on what it is you're looking to do. So, first up, and probably the biggest reason why people are likely to buy this controller, the Hall effect thumbsticks. Now, that isn't to say this is the only controller with Hall effect sticks. There's been a great push by third-party controllers for quite some time now to move away from potentiometer-based sticks to Hall effects. Now, why is that? That's because, for those unaware, potentiometer-based thumbsticks tend to wear out due to wear and tear on the potentiometers. That results in gamepad makers having to come up with alternate solutions to replace said thumbsticks. For example, in the Thrustmaster's case, they offer replacement modules to replace any thumbsticks that suffer from stick drift. But since Hall effect thumbsticks use magnets, there's no chance for dirt, dust, and damage to cause problems, at least not for the sensors. That's because stick drift isn't entirely avoidable even for Hall effect thumbsticks. For instance, on my King Kong 2 Pro, I do get stick drift, but it's not caused by a sensor going bad. Instead, it's because the recentering spring is not as strong, requiring a dead zone of at least 7% to prevent stick drift from its natural tendency to reset to a much looser neutral position. You can see that there's quite a bit of play at the center of these thumbsticks. That's where the Flydigi Direwolf 2 comes out on top. The recentering spring is much better, requiring only a 3% dead zone to prevent stick drift, less than half of my King Kong 2 Pro. Another thing that Flydigi does very well is the amount of customizability. Everything from buttons to triggers and sticks to the gyro and vibration, everything can be customized via Flydigi's Space Station application. And not only can you remap existing controller buttons, you can also remap it to macros, keyboard key presses, and even a gyro mouse control. And on top of that, you can switch between up to 4 profiles on the fly using select and any of the A, B, X, Y buttons. Now, what's the downside? Any custom remaps that cannot be found on the controller itself, like keyboard key presses, require the Space Station application to be running in order to work. Otherwise, it will simply be a blank bind. Another thing is the battery life. The 800 mAh battery, which is the same used on the Vader 3 Pro, allows you to play for more than a single day between charges. This means as long as you remember to plug it in at the end of each gaming session, you should never have to worry about the controller dying on you. That said, I do wish the Direwolf had contacts just like the Vader 3 Pro, so I can easily dock it and charge it that way. But I can understand why it doesn't, since the Direwolf is the more budget-friendly line of controllers compared to the Vader, and even more so, the Apex. And the last thing I want to touch on as far as things I like about this controller is the D-pad. This is a very nice D-pad. This is probably the most satisfying D-pad I've ever used, with the only exception being the Vader 3 Pro, because these are literally the same D-pad designs. It is very easy to tell when an input has been made thanks to the tactile feedback in both the feel and sound. However, I do have one big problem with it, but we'll go over that in the dislike section up next. So, what I was gonna say is that one of the things I really disliked about the D-pad is that I could press all 4 directions at once. But after further testing, it actually looks like that's not possible to do. You can only ever press 2 directions at the same time and no more. I feel like I used to be able to press all 4 directions at some point, but maybe there was a firmware update or a software update of some kind that now prevents that. But I'm happy to report it is currently not possible to press all 4 directions on the D-pad at once, which is fantastic, especially for things like fighting games. So, not really a dislike anymore, it's all likes so far, so let's move on to actual dislikes. So the first dislike is the lack of impulse triggers. One of the things I thoroughly enjoy about my Vader 3 Pro and Xbox Series controller are the additional sources of feedback from the games I play. I like that I can feel how effective my pedal modulation is in racing games, or the fingertip rumble of firing a gun in first-person shooters. That is completely gone with the Direwolf 2. At least it does still have the grip rumbles for regular old rumble feedback. And another thing I don't like are the membrane buttons, or rather, the buttons themselves are actually just okay, just like regular old Xbox Series buttons. However, Flydigi says that they are silicone 2.0 buttons for silent gaming, making it a blessing for gamers in shared spaces. I mean, that's great and all, but, let's just go ahead and ignore the fact that Flydigi's D-pad is one of the loudest D-pads ever made, which totally negates the, silent gaming aspect of the Silicone 2.0 buttons. Again, not really an issue with the controller because the buttons are just okay. I just don't like the marketing behind justifying these membrane buttons. And lastly, this controller only supports computer, Android, iOS, and Nintendo Switch. There is no official support for Xbox nor PlayStation consoles. Sure, there's ways around this using adapters, however, you should be cautious considering the recent news about Xbox preventing unlicensed third-party controllers from working with their consoles. Now, the big question. Should you get the Direwolf 2? So if this controller fits into your budget and you're looking for an Xbox-style controller that doesn't necessarily need to work with Xbox consoles, then sure, this could be a fantastic budget-friendly option compared to the Vader and especially Apex lineup of Flydigi devices. Now that said, if you don't mind not having Hall effect thumbsticks, then check out my review of the Shiozen Z2 from Sunway Tech found here.